they feel that Trump and the Americans are getting a bit fed up with Putin and starting to see that, just because you say lots of nice things about Putin doesn't mean you're actually going to get him to move on some of these big issues, and that maybe the Americans are starting to realise that actually it's not as simple as all that.
I'm joined now by Josh Glancy, editor of the News Review at the Sunday Times. Hello, Josh.
Good morning, Hugo.
How are you?
Good. I was just reading up on this cat that was cut. I mean, I had so many questions about it.
3 days, a cat drinking beer.
But apparently it was next to an open can of lager. So what I want to know is, did the cat open the lager?
How and why there was an open can of lager beneath the floorboards, I don't quite understand.
So it does beg quite a lot of questions.
You've got to look. It's in the Sun. It's a great story. You've got to look at the picture of the cat. Looks kind of like it spent 3 days drinking lager. It's one of those cats. Not you, Larry. It's one of those cats that kind of always does. Those flat-faced ones. Amazing story. I don't know why it's not everywhere. I haven't checked the FT. It might be there as well. Who knows? Let's crack on. Donald Trump is in the Middle East, as we said. He's outlined a vision of commerce, not chaos, in Saudi Arabia, which he says will bring stability, peace and prosperity to the entire Middle East. He's continuing his visit in Saudi Arabia with a meeting of the Gulf Cooperation Council before later today heading off to Qatar. He's also expected to say hello to Syria's interim president and also to lift US sanctions on Damascus, which is quite big news. But so, Josh, look, first up, he's off to Qatar, a country that's offered him a $400 million jet to replace Air Force One. What can we expect from him today? What's he going to be up to in Qatar?
Well, it's the same dizzying tour of palaces and lots of gold trim and lots of great announcements about eye-watering sums of investment that may or may not find their way into the American economy. But it's a big, it's kind of a big jamboree, isn't it? And Trump has always had an affinity for the Gulf, as has his son-in-law Jared Kushner, who's a kind of key intermediary with the Gulf princes. Because they are focused on commerce, not chaos. I mean, that line is almost perfectly calibrated to be music to the ears of the Emiratis, the Qatari sheikhs, and Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia. They're all about wanting stability in the region so they can get on with making their countries extremely rich and building a kind of future for their countries that doesn't just rely on oil and gas. So there's a lot of quite deep personal and financial sort of alignment between Trump and the Gulf.
It's kind of diplomacy without the diplomacy, right? He's all the things that previous presidents have gone to the Middle East to talk about, worried about intensely, whether it's Israel and the occupied territories, whether it's whatever it is. He's sort of removing all of that and just doing let's make money.
Yeah, I mean, and it would be nice if one could just sort of wish all the problems away. I don't know that it will necessarily be that simple in the Middle East. I mean, he's basically saying, we're all going to get on with making loads of money, and he's saying to Iran, you could do this too, or you can continue down your path of trying to get a nuclear weapon and trying to sort of destabilize the region. I don't think the mullahs in Iran are necessarily going to say, oh, okay, Donald, let's invest in Apple and forget we ever fell out. I suspect it might be a bit more complicated than that, but it is a nice idea in theory, I suppose. But yeah, there are quite a lot of personal business connections as well between the Trump family and Gulf interests. So I think his idea is that everyone gets rich, but maybe particularly him.
Is it a bit naive? Because Saudi Arabia. Yes, Saudi Arabia is very keen on making money, but also has had a huge role in the war in Yemen. Is sort of exerting muscle around the region. Qatar, is often sort of at loggerheads with the Saudi agenda. Qatar's very close to various groups in Palestine. Is a bit closer to Iran than Saudi Arabia is in different kind of ways. Does seem to have a very different agenda. Is he just kind of sort of ignoring all of that?
Broadly, yeah. I mean, I think that one thing that one should never ignore in the Middle East is religion, faith, and the kind of deep sectarian divisions that run back centuries. And you can't just paper those over with a big fat check. That they exist. Qatar is a country of deep faith as well as commercial interest, and you're right, it funds Hamas. It has sort of Muslim Brotherhood connections through that. These aren't going to go away, and so yeah, it's a lovely sort of, as I said, lovely gold leaf jamboree, but it doesn't necessarily sort of make all those issues disappear.
Yeah. Well, we've heard he's going to be saying hello to Syria's leader Ahmed al-Sharaa, who remains a listed terrorist according to the US government. He was once, of course, in Al-Qaeda. We're not quite sure exactly how and where he's going to be saying hello, but that's quite a big deal, isn't it?
It's a really big deal, and lifting sanctions is a big deal as well. I think that the Americans have had a few months to look at this guy and to assess him and to assess what post-Assad Syria looks like. There have obviously been flare-ups of sectarian violence, which have been pretty, terrifying, and lots of people have died. But they obviously are coming to the conclusion that they can give this guy a bit of relief on sanctions and give him a bit of a benediction with a meeting with Trump, and that he's worth tentatively supporting, which is really interesting because, there are a lot of question marks over this guy given his background, given the nature of Syria's sectarian divisions. I know, people like Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart have come in for a lot of flack for meeting this guy and hosting him on their podcast. But obviously the hope is that Syria, while unlikely to become a perfect place, is on a better track now. And so this is a really big moment.
Before we move on from the Middle East, the fact that Trump's not going to Israel this time around, when he's sort of in the region. Obviously, it's quite hard to fly directly from Riyadh to Israel for various reasons. Nonetheless, is that a sign that he's perhaps getting a bit sort of cheesed off with Netanyahu? That Trump talks big talk on peace, and Netanyahu seems less keen.
There's definitely been a cooling of relations. I don't know how substantial that cooling is, but there's definitely a feeling that the Israelis aren't listening and that they aren't playing ball. And that they're not sort of on board with Trump's big, joyful peace proposals for the region. So it's quite worrying. And also the overtures and noises Trump's been making towards Iran do not land well for Netanyahu and the Israelis. So I think there's quite a lot of anxiety about all this in Israel, about where Trump's headed, because he is obviously a very capricious, mercurial character. And even though he is pro-Israel and he's not put them on a leash in terms of some of the humanitarian issues in Gaza, which the previous US administration did. But he is, if he feels impatient with them, he is quite capable of tacking away.
Look, meanwhile, Volodymyr Zelensky is planning to fly to Turkey tomorrow, even if Vladimir Putin won't be there. There was some suggestion that the two were going to meet there. We still don't know if that's going to happen. More excitingly, though, than Vladimir Putin meeting Volodymyr Zelensky, you met Volodymyr Zelensky at the weekend.
Yes, that was the real.
That's the real story here. Yeah. How was he? What did he tell you?
It was great. Yeah, I was there with Keir Starmer, and he went obviously out. There was a big coalition of the willing meeting with Macron and Friedrich Merz of Germany and Donald Tusk. I had a couple of minutes with Zelensky, but he was quite buoyant. Obviously he's had a pretty rough few months diplomatically with all the Oval Office showdown and all of that. He seemed to be kind of somewhat recovered from all of that. He was a lot of bro hugs. It was all very tactile with Macron and Starmer. A lot of handshakes, a lot of hugs. But the feeling was that they feel that Trump and the Americans are also getting a bit fed up with Putin and starting to see that just because you say lots of nice things about Putin doesn't mean you're actually going to get him to move on some of these big issues, and that maybe the Americans are starting to realise that actually it's not as simple as all that, and so maybe coming a little bit more around to the Ukrainian position. But again, Trump is such a kind of capricious figure at the centre of all this. It's hard to be too reliant on the intelligence you're getting, but certainly some of the people around him are, I think perhaps the scales have fallen from their eyes a little bit in terms of what they can get Putin to say and do.
Well, there's some suggestion that even if Putin doesn't go to Turkey, Donald Trump might. I mean, he's in the area, he's got a new plane, why not? What do you think?
I don't know if the new plane hasn't actually arrived yet. It would be slightly odd for Trump and Zelensky to sit down in Istanbul without Putin, but it's the kind of sort of gesture that you could imagine him considering.
Yeah, well, absolutely.